All right, so already marginally useful role in here over. I think you're right. It is exactly a good segue into our last paper. And just some logistics, this is a note. So we will have a little bit of time, about 10 minutes at the end of this session. So please kind of stick around and feel free to come up and talk to all the presenters afterwards. So today we have Joseph J. Williams here to talk to us about revising learner misconceptions without feedback. So you guys can brawl afterwards about what the right thing is. I do want to say this is a best paper honorable mention, so I'd like to congratulate you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so do that. Further.
All right, thank you. And actually, I did add this parenthesis without external feedback. One thing I have to say before every talk is that I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, an island in the Caribbean, because people have told me in the past that they missed the first part of my talk trying to guess where I'm from. So now that I've solved that mystery, I hope I have for your full attention. So the question that's motivating us in this work is really thinking about what are different approaches to providing feedback on learning. The huge promise of the internet for education is that any one of us across the world can learn just by opening a mobile phone and going to Wikipedia, reading about policy, or going into a MOOC and starting to solve statistics problems. But there's a problem. When I'm in a classroom, a teacher doesn't just tell me facts. They actually provide me with feedback on what I don't know, on my misconceptions or incorrect beliefs. To illustrate this, let's think about an example. Imagine you are a learner in a MOOC on statistics, and you're learning about how to compare samples from different populations. So let's say, in particular, you're given a problem where Sarah. And this is actually going to be the inspiration for our experimental design using these materials. Tom's in history, Sarah's in math. Tom gets a score of 85, Sarah's got 69. So as you're thinking about this, how is the university going to rank these students? Figure out who should be ranked higher or lower. Average is 79 versus 65, 90 versus 87, and the standard deviation in Tom's class is 8% versus 3 in Sarah's. If you think the university is going to rank Tom higher, put up your left hand. If you think they're going to rank Sarah higher, put up your right hand. Okay, you win. The reason the university is going to rank Sarah higher is because she has more standard deviations above the average in her class than Tom is in his. So statistically, this corresponds to saying that Sarah has a higher z-score or standardized normal score. Relative to the rest of the population variability, she's higher. But there's extensive research that many learners don't use this rule. They've got substantial misconceptions. They think, well, Tom's got a higher score, or he's more points above the average. We think of this kind of fact, that Sarah's ranked higher than Tom with these details, as an anomaly with respect to those misconceptions, because that actually contradicts those simple beliefs you could have, like expecting Tom to rank higher because he's got a higher score. There's extensive evidence that just giving learners these anomalies in an online environment won't be enough to make them change their beliefs. So what kind of approaches can we take to giving feedback on their misconceptions? Well, past work has looked at automated feedback. So building artificial intelligence into tutoring systems that will diagnose and remediate. You could think about crowdsourcing feedback, getting peers to give each other feedback. We're going to think about a different approach, which is how could we actually design online environments to elicit self-feedback from learners, to empower them to engage in the right cognitive processes that they're going to generate this feedback for themselves. To do this, which sounds implausible, we're going to draw on research in education that has shown that in classrooms, sometimes prompting students to explain a concept will teach them more than if you actually explain it to them. And in particular, we're going to draw on part of my past life as a psychologist, where the psychology part of my PhD looked at how asking and explaining why was especially important for helping people discover underlying principles. So we ran these experiments in the context of an online study with about 600 crowd workers recruited on Mechanical Turk. And as I mentioned, we're going to use the same materials as before. We would give learners these facts about people like Tom and Sarah and who was ranked higher. And to investigate which prompts would help them, we compared 50% of people assigned to the explain condition, explain why the student was ranked higher, versus the other half assigned to the right thoughts condition. Write any thoughts you have about this information. So they're both matched in terms of 90 seconds on each, and both of them involve articulating reflection and language. Instructors might also wonder, well, how many anomalies do I have to give people for these prompts to be effective? So as a second factor, independent variable, what we did was we presented 6 of these facts in all. So you'd get a fact, you'd explain or write thoughts for 90 seconds, you get another one, you explain again. But of these facts, we either assigned people a condition where there was a single anomaly in each of these facts, or there were multiple, up to 4. And so both in the explain condition and the write thoughts, you assign to these. So now, to measure how these different variations affect learning, what we did is before and after learning a phase, we administered a pre-test and post. So the idea is we gave people, these participants, pairs of students, and we didn't tell them who was ranked higher. They had to predict it. And so this allowed us to measure to what extent are people using the correct standard deviation rule or misconceptions, and how is that influenced by learning? So for the results, the first broad question we have is, are these prompts to reflect on anomalies at all effective? What we're going to look at is that accuracy increase. When you look at the pre to post test, how much does your accuracy increase in using the standard deviation rule when it's pitted against misconceptions? And so actually, we saw a 50% improvement. So in fact, prompting people to reflect does actually get them to engage in some kind of self-feedback on misconceptions, even when they're not actually told anything explicitly about what they might or might not believe. And so I think about this as actually, here's a way of designing environments so that we can, if we understand the underlying psychology of people, we can actually leverage learners' minds as a computational resource, because we can get them to generate feedback that we'd otherwise have to bring from algorithms or crowds. Now, instructors might wonder, well, which prompts are effective? So on the vertical axis is, again, this accuracy increase from pre to post. But now there's write thoughts versus explain. And in fact, explaining why this might be ranked higher is significantly better than just writing thoughts. So it's not just any prompt that helps. How many anomalies do instructors have to provide? And so now what you can see is that when there's just a single anomaly, there isn't a benefit for explanation, but that is realized when there are multiple anomalies. So it's not just that having anomalies is important, the amount matters. And you can read in the notes more about how even when we create a number of anomalies, it's actually important how you design them so that people explain multiple anomalies at once rather than distribute them. So just to conclude, prompts to reflect anomalies can actually get learners to be leveraged for computation and generating self-feedback. Explaining was more effective than writing thoughts, and the number of anomalies needed was several. So in terms of ongoing work, in my other life, I do apply machine learning to cognition, and now we've actually built a system and published a learning at scale 2 weeks ago that actually tried to integrate automated, crowdsourced, and self-feedback methods to give people explanations. And if you're interested in this kind of topic, self-feedback, explanation, are really 100-year research topics. And so if you applied for an NSF grant, they'll try to bring together psychologists, HCI researchers, and machine learning doctors so that we can generate different methods for listening to this kind of self-feedback. And that's all enabled using a framework for collaborative experimentation and machine learning, which we call MOOCLEX. So I want to end on audience participation. So silently explain to yourself, what have you learned from this talk? Did any anomalies come up? All right, I want to turn it over for questions. And thanks so much for everyone's contribution to this research. If you're not one of the chosen few who makes it to the mic, you can go to that URL, tiny.cc /CQ. It's a Google Doc, and I'll answer any questions you put in there by the end of today.
Please speak your thoughts and he'll explain.
Hi, Scott Clemmer from UC San Diego. This was a really great talk, and I'm wondering if you could help me with that broader mystery that I have.
Okay.
Is that the many active learning endeavors that demonstrably help students, we don't always like. At dinner on Friday, I had a conversation with colleagues about clickers, which can be, under some circumstances, extremely useful, and yet, people don't always like them. Peer review, often extremely useful. Even when it's useful, people don't always like it. And I bet that some people had that experience with the self-reflection at the end. You're like, come on, buddy, why are you telling me what to do? But the only reason we're here is the main reason we're here is to learn stuff. And so what are your thoughts on the gap between what helps us learn and what we like for stuff like this, for these metacognitive activities?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's another one of these 200-year research questions. But one way you might think about this is that that's actually where HGI can be especially helpful, because a lot of these methods have not been deployed in actual systems that people are using. So thinking really carefully about, well, how do we incentivize people? Is it that you make something that's tracking the number of times you engage in self-explanation, so people can feel like it takes effort, but I'm actually contributing to my learning? One thing we've been looking at is what kinds of metacognitive interventions do we need to motivate people to use study strategies? So you can imagine experiments where we do a growth mindset intervention, and we cross that with providing people with study strategy training. So maybe helping people understand that this is directly increasing their learning on a sort of bite-sized way might help promote it. But I think it's a great question. It's a constant obstacle. One famous psychologist, Daniel Willingham, has said in his book, brains by our age are not optimized for learning. They're optimized for doing. It costs effort to learn, and most people just don't want to spend that effort. So we really have to think of how to get around that.
Hi, Edith Law from University of Waterloo. My question is actually very similar to Scott's question, except that I had the opposite idea. I thought that maybe this kind of self-reflection thing could be actually quite motivating because people feel like they discovered something. So I was wondering why or whether you did or why you did not look at engagement. Did you look at whether people were engaged in the system longer or whether they liked the process?
That's a really good question. What we've done is actually run this study to see if there's an effect at all. And actually what we're like to do next is follow up with more detailed process data. So actually collecting those kind of engagement measures, more about what exactly people are doing while they're doing it. And I think for that setting, it's especially useful to do it in a real-world setting like MOOC. One thing I will say is there's actually some work, it's a bit provocative, saying that when you explain something and you get why that happens, you feel a rush of physiological reward. Some people have argued that's actually because your physiology is tied to learning. So it's actually a physiological reward to incentivize learning. So it may be that there are ways to kind of tap into that. If it's inherently satisfying to get an explanation as opposed to a fact, then maybe that's ways we can actually get these systems being used more.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chinmay from CMU. So I had a question about sort of the kinds of questions that were asked in the study. It seems like these questions had right answers, right? And we know that people reflect on, for example, how an interface works, and then they come up with all kinds of superstitions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I have to resize the window before I hit save, otherwise it doesn't work.
Yes.
Right? So there's this risk that you would come up with the wrong explanations for phenomena, if there is even a right answer to those phenomena. So can you reflect on, for example, how would we extend this to places where we don't quite know what right is?
Yeah, so I think you asked two questions there. One is whether explaining could actually hurt learning. And that's in fact what one of my papers showed, is that if prompting people to explain why helps you find patterns, well, sometimes it's going to drive you to the wrong patterns, like your superstitious belief on interface. So that's something we've shown. And that's where I think understanding mechanisms that underlie explanation help you know, well, now I should prompt you to explain why. But here, it's not a good idea. You don't have enough knowledge, or you've hit on the wrong pattern. The second question about how do we extend it to more open-end domains, that's a fantastic one. And one way I think you're going to really have to push the understanding mechanisms forward why you design technology to help people reflect. My kind of thoughts there would be along the lines of part of the effects of benefits of explaining may be actually that you're generating information. So there's work in psychology on retrieval practice. They're just trying to generate information, makes it easier to access. So maybe that's actually somewhere where we could expect it to be beneficial. No matter whether you're right or wrong, just the fact that you're generating it could be useful. Another kind of idea is that you could imagine that we should always get towards the right answer, but actually that's not how these open-ended domains work. You've got a series of hypotheses and you iterate between them. And that's what children's causal learning looks like as well. So you could actually think one of the reasons explaining is helpful is because it identifies incorrect hypotheses that are somewhat closer. But once you've got a hypothesis, that then sets you up so that you can test it. So maybe it's actually not bad if you come up with the wrong answer, as long as you're constantly iterating and have opportunities to override it.
Thank you.
Sure.
I guess that means that me asking these questions is actually helpful, right? I mean,
I should be paying you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Roberto Martinez from the University of Technology, Sydney, and I'm coming from the Learn Analytics community, so I'm very familiar with this work. And commonly, the view of feedback is something external that comes from the teacher or from in other communities from an algorithm. And on the other hand, feedback sounds more like reflection of metacognition.
Yes.
Which, in a view, is quite different because the student needs to reflect on what they did, on their own misconceptions, etc. So my question is about what's your view about what is missing in this approach, which is very valid and very attractive, especially when we need to scale the feedback. But what is missing? I mean, the teacher already knows what is wrong, what is misconception, has a pedagogical approach to help the student to develop, and that's what we need. How do you think we can actually bring both together, if we are doing it now, or if it's something that needs to be developed and included in your approach?
Okay, I think the tributary question is what's missing this approach in the sense of how can we combine things like self-feedback with external source of feedback? One idea you could have is that even when you give me feedback, like we ran an experiment where we told people, you know how the university might rank? They might rank by choosing who's more standard deviations above the average. And we told them along with 5 other hypotheses. That actually didn't help learners that much. So the idea is what we think of as feedback because we've said it to someone, psychologically isn't necessarily feedback. So one kind of nice manipulation you can imagine, which I think would apply to the open-ended domains Chinmay mentioned, is where you combine prompting people to explain and then giving them someone else's explanation and ask them to compare it. Because if a teacher gives me feedback saying, Joseph, it's more standard deviations above the average, that may not hook up to my knowledge in the right way. But if you get me to explain, well, why is that right or why is that wrong? Maybe that act will actually make me more receptive to that explanation. And it's certainly true that we can't go around prompting people to explain out loud all the time. I think this is a big research question for the future. And what I'm interested in is how do you combine telling people information with having them generate it itself? That's super broad. My focus on explaining why is a way to sort of narrow that down to a setting where we can use technology and psychology to try and address it. Thank you.
Let's thank all our speakers.
Oh yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, I've been actually, I've been doing a couple of things last years. Like, when I started thinking a lot more on education. Cool. Just, it's like you make it super